Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Today we're going to talk about Starman, stars, and the music of David Bowie, and specifically about a time period under David's musical career, and some things about understanding things that blow your mind, and about reinventing yourself. And we're going to use the music and a couple of the songs from that time period to discuss that today. So, with that, let's jump into the episode now. All right. Well, I have a great love and appreciation for David Bowie, both as an artist himself, as well as a human being, in a lot of the different things that he did, some of the social changes actually that kind of came about or that he highlighted from his art that you may not even realize, and probably not going to talk about all of that today. But wanted to talk a little bit about David Bowie and the Ziggy Stardust phase of his career. So Bowie was one of those people who I remember watching a documentary. He was very, very professional in how he conducted himself. And I remember watching a documentary about Abbey Road Studios there in London. And one of the engineers said Bowie was about the only person who came in. They set everything up. He did one take, and that was it. One take Bowie, right? Where most people, I mean, some of the songs, I remember one of the Beatles songs, they recorded over 100 different versions of it before they finally got it right. But Bowie was in, boom, do it, done, out, right? And there's a very interesting part of his career that I want to talk a little bit about today because I think there's some lessons that we all can learn about authenticity, about being ourselves, about reinventing ourselves, maybe when things come along in our life that we never even dreamed of, things that blow our mind and sometimes shake our reality, and how we can end up changing and reinventing ourselves. And so, first off, I wanted to talk about there was a David Bowie exhibit that was touring the U.S. And I happened to be in New York, and I think it was at the Brooklyn Museum. And so I was there doing some training, and we got done, noon or 1 o'clock, something like that. And so I had a little time in the afternoon and decided I wanted to go to the David Bowie exhibit. So I hopped onto the subway. I was in downtown Manhattan. Went over to Brooklyn, walked a little bit to the museum, went in, said, "Hey, I want to get a ticket for the David Bowie exhibition." And the woman said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, but we're sold out of tickets for today." And I was like, right? I mean, this is the only afternoon I can do this. Came all the way from Manhattan to do this. And she said, "But we do have tickets available for members. If you're a member of the museum, we can let you in." I was like, "How much is it for a membership?" Right. And I think it was like $100 or something like that. So I'm like, "All right, sold. I'll just pay a little extra to get in today." And so, for several hours, I went through this exhibit, and it showed a lot of the costumes that David wore, because he was one that was very big on costumes and kind of creating whole personas that changed throughout his career as well. And I think that's another thing for us to look at and to realize that for all of us, we're reinventing ourselves our whole life, and to kind of lean into that. So, there were all the different costumes. Some of his instruments were there. There were, some of the lyrics, handwritten lyrics when he was writing the song, and just different memorabilia. And so I spent hours just being enthralled and going around in there. In fact, I had to buy the book, right, that had pictures of all the stuff in it, because I was really taken by this exhibit. So, they gave me a bag with my book, and I can't remember about a few other things too. And so, of course, on it, I think it had, probably Brooklyn Museum, but it had the David Bowie is Inside, I think was the name of the exhibition. plastered on the outside of the bag. And so, I stayed, I think, until closing time pretty much, and left, went back to get on the subway to go back to Manhattan so I could fly out the next morning to go back home. And so I get on the subway, and for some reason it wasn't very crowded actually at that time going from Brooklyn into Manhattan. It was probably busier going the other way with people trying to go home. So there weren't a lot of people on the subway at that point. So I was able to actually sit down. And we were only there a few stops, and all of a sudden I look across the subway. There's a man sitting on the other side of the subway from me. And I could tell from his dress that he was well off, right? He was wearing expensive clothing, but it was kind of hip clothing. The jewelry that he had on and kind of what he was wearing, could tell that he was kind of a hip sort of guy that had some money. And I remember looking across, and he kind of smiles at me. And so I'm sitting there. I've got my little David Bowie bag sitting on the subway floor, and I'm just kind of going back. And he looks across at me, and he kind of smiles, and so I smile back. Just kind of being friendly. And all of a sudden, I see him kind of roll up his sleeve a little bit, and there's a Ziggy Stardust tattoo on his arm. And he kind of smiles back and winks at me. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's kind of like, hey, I'm a Bowie fan too, right? And so we ended up talking, until he or I had to get off. I can't remember what it was. And we were talking a little bit about he was obviously a big Bowie fan if he got a tattoo of Ziggy Stardust on his arm. Uh, and he was sharing with me how many times he'd been to that exhibit and things like that, and some of the stuff that he loved about Bowie. And I think I shared a post before on something like "Show me your Ziggy Stardust tattoo." But I think it's an important thing to kind of realize is that a lot of times, especially early on, a lot of Bowie's fans were kind of in the fringes because Bowie would do a lot of things to kind of break some of the social norms. And so they were kind of seen as outcasts, or people that were different than everybody else. And that's changed, because again, I'm sure most people have heard some of Bowie's music. Some prefer, certain periods of his music over others, and that's fine. We all have our own opinion. But I like most of the stuff that he did, even though it was so different. But what that example showed to me as well is, some of the times we're afraid to really show who we are. But when we do, it's surprising how many people around us we find believe like we do, like some of the same things that we do, think some of the same ways that we do, but we have to show it, right? If I wasn't proudly carrying around a bag with that said David Bowie on the outside of it, that man across from me in the subway wouldn't have showed me his tattoo, right? But I was showing something externally, he showed me something, right? And then we struck up a conversation, had a little bonding time there for a few minutes while we were on the subway together. So to me, again, that's just a lesson of, never be afraid of showing who you really are authentically. I show up here and I'm kind of weird. I mean, I cough, I take sips of coffee, I mumble over my words a little bit because I like Bowie, just like to do one take. If there's some mistakes, it's okay. Let's just do one take. You see me as I am authentically. I don't get up in the morning and put on makeup. Uh, I don't even comb my hair. Okay, I wear a hat. I just show up as I am. And I think the more that we can show up as we are authentically, the more people around us are going to show us that they're that way too, and they love us for that as well. So, let's jump into the music a little bit because I think it's interesting. Again, the Bowie had this Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars phase where he kind of created an alter ego to the point that it wasn't David Bowie who was on stage; it was a concert for Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, okay, which was the band name. And so, I always found it kind of interesting that he would kind of come up with an alter ego. And it kind of fascinated me. I've done some research on it, and there were actually several reasons I think for it. One is he was a very shy person personally, from the way I understand it. And so for him to show up on stage, he had to kind of step into this alter ego to be able to have the courage and perform on stage. And so that's what he always kind of saw it as, is that he was acting out a part. And so he would create, again, over his lifetime, you can see that there are different personas of David Bowie, clear up until the end to the Black Star album just before he died, where it was pretty much an old man in jeans and a t-shirt, right? That was who the David Bowie was. The real David Jones was his real name, was showing up and kind of giving that last album before he died, right? Because he knew that he was on his way out. So, but let's talk about Ziggy Stardust a little bit, because I think it's also interesting how, at that time in the late 60s, early 70s, and again, this is around 71, 72. So again, this is, 52, 53 years ago, quite a ways away, when he did some of these things, and it was very controversial and shocking at that point. He kind of created this androgynous character who was an alien in this band from Mars, and they kind of went around pretending like they were space aliens, which again seems a little different, a little weird, right? To some people, and to some people it was. But I think, there's a big reason for that. And one of those goes back to, again, my experience, or some of the stuff that I saw in that museum when I looked at that exhibit. And one of the things that I saw was the handwritten lyrics for the song Space Oddity. And so you probably heard it. It's one of his more famous ones. Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on, right? And kind of goes through this whole kind of storyline about Major Tom and ground control, right? And then you've got the great lyric where again it's, um, kind of the chorus of it, right? I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today, right? This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirt you wear, right? Okay, so great song. But it always, again, it kind of tells a story. And I was always kind of fascinated as to, again, here's this man on Earth writing this song as if he were an astronaut. And why would that be? And in that exhibition, right, it shows a picture. There was a picture that was taken from one of the early NASA space missile, not missiles, got rockets, right, where they sent people out, and it took a picture of the Earth from space. And so all you could see was this blue dot of the Earth and then this vastness, blackness of space around it. And so that picture was obviously circulated in the media and everything else when it came back. And looking at that picture kind of gave David the idea for this song, Space Oddity, right? And feeling like, well, if I was an astronaut out in space, what would it be like? Especially if something happened and, I got disconnected and here I am floating in space, or floating in this tin can out there. And so it's a very powerful song when you sit down and listen to it. In fact, sometimes when I listen to it, I cry, right? Because I can imagine myself being Major Tom. Now, we're not astronauts, but there are certain times in our life when we feel like we're disconnected, We're floating around far away from our home, and sometimes we get disconnected and we may never be able to go back home. In fact, if you think about the classic hero's journey that Joseph Campbell talked about, the hero goes off on the journey and eventually, goes through all the different phases of the journey and then returns home with the boon. But what happens so much of the time is that hero comes home and shares what they can, but home has changed, or they have changed and home hasn't changed. And so often, right, the protagonist ends up not being able to really go home. They go home, but they have to kind of leave again, right? And you see this in a lot of the different movies and a lot of the stories that are out there. Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are one, right? When Bilbo got back at the end of The Hobbit, the Shire just wasn't the same anymore for him. And he longed to go back and be with the elves. When Frodo gets home from the Lord of the Rings, it's the same thing, right? The hero returns home, but it's not quite the same. And sometimes in our lives we may feel like we're just floating in this vastness of space and we don't know what to do, right? And so, to me, again, that song has a lot of meaning. And it's also a space kind of related theme that Bowie went through in part of his life. Okay. Now, another song of his is Starman. And so I want to talk about that a little bit too, because to me, there's some very powerful messages in that song, and we're going to get into that here in just a minute, right? Is actually kind of what's in that. Now, again, the way that I understand it, he had met someone who had supposedly an encounter with extraterrestrials, and that kind of led to him making this song, very similar to Space Oddity. Now, did David have encounters? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Right. The fact that he ended up spending a part of his career kind of playing an alien is kind of interesting. Right. And again, now I just used that word alien, extraterrestrial. So don't shut me off right now, but because we're going to talk a little bit about that because this song brings up some things that I want to talk about because sometimes we hear things that might blow our mind. And when that happens, sometimes, as I said, I think earlier, it's really reality shattering sorts of things. It's things that's hard for us to really kind of grasp. It's hard for us to believe because maybe we've been taught something else our whole life, right? And so when you go back and you look at things in history, even from a scientific perspective, there was a time on this planet when people believed the world was flat. They were afraid of going too far and falling off the end of the earth, right? There were people who believed that. And so for somebody to come along and say, no, the earth is round, it's a ball, we can actually sail all the way around the world, right? People didn't believe it. It was something that was really earth shattering. It was reality shattering to them. No, you can't do that because you're going to fall off the edge of the earth, right? And so people like Christopher Columbus and Magellan proved it by actually sailing a ship literally all the way around the world, right? Magellan went all the way around. Columbus went to the Americas, right? He was thinking he could get to East India quicker by going that way, but he ended up coming to America instead, right? Coming to America. Okay. I feel good. You know that reference. There you go. So, there's an example of that, right? Now, another thing, when Isaac Newton came out with Newtonian physics, again, at the time, that was an earth-shattering, reality-shattering thing, right? Like Newton, you're crazy. That cannot be. And he went through and he kind of showed, scientifically how no Newtonian Cartesian kind of physics works, right? But then again, we come later, and people like Einstein come along with more about relativity and quantum and some other things that have come along that have questioned Newton's theories, right? And so anytime some of these things come along, there's always, a lot of people who are like, nope, no way. I can't believe that. That cannot be true. If that's true, then my whole worldview is shattered, right? Just like I think it was Copernicus, said, hey, you know what? The Earth rotates around the sun instead of the sun rotating around the Earth. And again, everybody was like, no, that can't be, right? Until it was proven. So there's certain things like that that are going to come across in our life, and they could be different things for different people. But I want to talk about because I think the Starman song really kind of encapsulates and shows some of this, right? And so this may be a lesser known song to you. You may have never heard it. You may have. I don't know. But let me just go through some of the lyrics a little bit, right? And so again, this is kind of a different song in the way that he kind of did it, where he's more kind of talking in a lot of the song, right? So he starts off, hey, 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 right? Didn't know what time it was. The lights were low, ho, ho. I leaned back on my radio, ho, ho. Some cat was laying down some rock and roll, right? A lot of soul, he said. And so he kind of goes through like that, right? In how he does the song. And then he said, then the loud sound did seem to fade, came back like a slow voice on a wave of phase. That weren't no DJ. That was hazy cosmic jive. So, again, this song, just like Space Oddity, is kind of telling a story. Okay. So it's balladic, balladish kind of in nature, in that it is not in its form, but in how it's actually telling a story, right? So again, there was this person that was listening to the radio, and all of a sudden he hears something different on the radio. And he's like, hold it, what is this? And he realizes that weren't no DJ, that was hazy cosmic jive, right? Meaning, hold it, I'm hearing something from outer space, right? And then the chorus that everybody knows, right? There's a star man waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a star man waiting in the sky. He told us not to blow it 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it. Let the children use it. Let all the children boogie. Okay, so you may have heard that part before. But there's some interesting things in there that we're going to come back to. Okay. But let's get to the second verse, right? Which is, again, he said, I had to phone someone, so I picked on you, right? He's like, I just heard this on the radio and I got to tell somebody. So he picks up the phone and he calls his friend and he says, hey, that's far out. So you heard him too, right? So the friend that he's talking to heard something coming through the radio as well, right? And so he says, switch on the TV. We may pick him up on channel 2. Look out your window. I can see his light. If we can sparkle, he may land tonight. Don't let your papa know, or he'll get us locked up in fright. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, right? So here you have a person who all of a sudden realizes something or hears something on the radio, hears something from outer space and says, oh my gosh, I got to tell somebody else. They go and they talk to their friend who's like, yeah, I heard that too. Wow, right? Let's turn on the TV because maybe they're talking about it, right? But they probably weren't, because a lot of this stuff isn't talked about on the news, even when people have these kind of experiences, right? And again, they're sitting here talking on the phone and they're like, hey, hold it. I can see the light. I can see the UFO outside. If we sparkle, he may land tonight. And that is so deep that we're not going to actually get into that completely today because I don't want to blow your minds too much. Okay. But he ends that verse by saying, "Don't let your papa know, or he'll get us locked up in fright." Right? Because sometimes, again, when these things happen, when you experience something, when you learn something new, other people around you may not believe it. Other people around you may think you're crazy, right? And so, because of that, right, you have to be careful about who you share some of these things with. Now, back to the chorus a little bit, okay? Because again, I think this is pretty amazing. You know, there's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our mind. So let's just think about that right now, right? Is if a starman or a star person, a star woman, a star being came to you right now, would that blow your mind? I'm guessing it probably would. Now, for some of you, it might not because you're like old news. I talk to aliens all the time. I don't know, right? But it's something that would blow people's minds usually, right? And again, these people, don't want to do harm. And so, if they think they're going to blow our minds, then they don't want to do that, right? But when these things end up kind of blowing our minds, it says, no, it's all worthwhile. He told me, and this, I love these lines: let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie, right? And boogie is another word for dance, right? So let all the children dance about this. Now, I love this song. This is another song that makes me cry a lot of times when I listen to it, right? Um, and so again, I'm not telling you what to believe, what not to believe. But what if there are star people that are waiting to come see us, but they think they'd blow our mind? If we're ready, maybe we can see them, right? Now, I'm not saying I've done this. But where I want to go on this is, what if that does exist? Would that blow your mind? Could you change your beliefs if all of a sudden an extraterrestrial were standing in front of you, talking to you telepathically? How would you react to that? Right? Would that blow your mind so much that you couldn't function? Or is that something that you could come to believe, that you could look at that you could change your belief systems, right? Again, just like the people in the old days, if you believed the world was flat and somebody came to you and said, no, the world is round, and you experience that the world is round, could you come to terms with that? Because a lot of people don't. A lot of people like to plug their ears and go, la 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 la. I cannot hear that. I don't want to hear that. I'm not going to hear that. And they choose not to believe it, choose to stay stuck in the beliefs that they've been taught. Now, the reality is, and again, the older that I have become, the more I have learned that many of the things that I were taught as I was growing up, things that I was taught in school, things about history that I were taught, are actually not true. They are a manipulation onto a storyline that people want you to believe, but it actually didn't happen that way, right? And so again, you can choose to believe or not believe whatever you want to believe. That's up to you. But let's just take, I'm just using the UFO extraterrestrial as an example. After the Second World War, there were a lot of people who said they saw UFOs. And there's been different times back and forth about this, on people saying they've seen it, saying that they've experienced encounters with UFOs, with actual extraterrestrial beings. And along the way, there's all these people who are saying these things happened. And at the same point, at least in the US government is saying, no, these things don't happen, right? No, this doesn't happen. Somebody just threw a hubcap up in the air and took a picture of it, right? See, look, I did this. Oh, it's just a weather balloon, right? And so pretty much since the Second World War, the US government has denied any of these things that have happened. Anybody who comes forward, a lot of times in the mainstream media or other places, they would say, well, these people are crazy. They're hallucinating. That didn't really happen. That was just a weather balloon. That was a whatever, right? Or they're a conspiracy theorist. That's a word that likes to get thrown out there a lot too. But slowly over time, and in fact, a few years ago, the US government actually admitted that they have a lot of information about UFO encounters. There have been videos that have surfaced of military people who have actually seen UFOs. There are lots of airline pilots and other people like that who have experienced some of these things as they've been flying around as well. There's people who claim that they have been visited by extraterrestrials. Well documented over time, right? And again, sometimes people, will admit to it, sometimes they don't. Again, I'm not saying that there are, that there isn't. You can believe whatever you want. But what I'm getting at is, when some of these things come up, can you actually change your beliefs when the evidence is presented? Right? Can you go into your heart? Can you decide for yourself what it is that you really feel, what it is that you really believe? Can you understand some of these things that you might be experiencing, right? Because when those things happen, right, we have to be able to adapt and to change and to reinvent ourselves. Okay. Now, they can be something as magnificent as a UFO or alien encounter, or it can just be that we just change. We just change, right? And so if I look at myself, the person I was when I was a little child was different than the person when I was a teenager. That was different than the person when I was, a young adult, from when I was, going through college, from when I was, at first married and had a small family, up to the point to where I am today. In fact, you can even go back, everything is documented online. You can go back and see what I looked like 5, 6 years ago. I look different now than I did back then, right? I have changed. I have reinvented myself. If you want, I show up in different alter egos like Bowie did, whatever you want to say, right? Now, why have I changed? Why have I reinvented myself? Why do I talk about things now that I didn't talk about 5 or 10 years ago? Because some of my beliefs have changed. Some of my beliefs have changed. And because of that, I view the world in a different way. Now, when these things happen, we can either choose to plug our ears and go la, 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 and not believe it, but that usually causes a cognitive dissonance, and usually people go crazy because of that, because they're trying to hold two simultaneous things in their consciousness at the same time. They can't do it, right? And so again, as your beliefs change, as new information comes along, as you have new experiences, we have to continue to reinvent ourselves, continue to change and become who we really are. Now, sometimes other people around you are not going to understand that, and that's okay. There's a lot of people in my life that are no longer in my life because they don't understand some of the changes that I have made. Right. And it reminds me of a meme I just saw on Facebook this last week. And there's a caterpillar and a butterfly sitting down at dinner eating. And the caterpillar looks at the butterfly and says, "You've changed." And the butterfly says, "You were supposed to change." Okay. And the reality is, we all change. Now, hopefully, we're all changing to become more authentically us, to quit pretending to be other people, right? And to make the changes to be a more authentic, more real, more peaceful, more at peace kind of person within ourselves. loving ourselves more, loving other people more, whatever that may look like for you. And along the way, you may go through different personas, just like David Bowie did, right? The beginning of his career, he did certain things. He went through Ziggy Stardust. He was the White Duke. He had all these different kind of personas along the way until at the end, he was just David Bowie. He was just the man, David Jones, right? At the end, right? Because throughout his life and even living through and trying on some of these different alter egos, right? He found out who he really was. And he had to experience some of these things. He had to go through some of these experiences, just like I've had to go through certain experiences that I've gone through to make me the person that I am now. Sometimes it's scary because it's like ripping pieces of you out or having parts of you die, if you will, right? In order to believe some of the new things or to live in a different way. But that's okay. That's what this life is about, right? It's learning, it's growing, it's evolving, it's becoming more authentically ourselves. It's about loving ourselves, about loving others, about serving and helping others as well, right? That's what this life is about. And as we go along on this path, right, we end up metamorphosizing like the caterpillar into the butterfly and into however many other things as well, right? I mean, again, right now, at this age, today as I'm recording it, I'm this person. Tomorrow, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be slightly different. A year from now, 2 years from now, I'm probably going to be different than I am now. Why? Because I'm going to have different experiences and I'm going to work through and I'm going to transmute and I'm going to integrate those things into who I am, right? I don't let these things blow my mind, right? Instead, I choose to, as it said, I'm going to boogie. I'm going to let the children lose it, use it, and boogie, and realize that, as we go through this life, the more we sparkle, the more light that we shine, right? To kind of use Bowie's lyric here, right? If we sparkle, he may land tonight. And again, I'm not talking about aliens per se. If that's what you want to see it as, fine. But the more you sparkle, the more light you give out, the more love you give out, things are going to show up in your life. And usually those things are pretty good if you're doing those things because there's a relationship, there's a cause and effect relationship that's a universal law, right, in the universe. There's a cause and there's an effect, right? For every choice, there's a consequence. And the more you sparkle, the more you become yourself, the more people will be attracted to you who are like you, who love you, and you will see your life change completely. People who no longer need to be in your life will go away. People who need to be in your life will come in your way, right? And things just always seem to work out. So that's where I'm going to kind of wrap up today, again, and especially when things come along that kind of blow your mind, don't let them blow your mind, right? Kind of analyze and figure out, well, now hold it. Is this just something new that we're learning? Like, hey, it's like the special, or general and special theory of relativity. It's just something new. I was taught Newtonian physics, but hey, on a smaller atomic level, this makes sense, right? Newtonian physics makes sense on a big, bulky thing, and general and special relativity makes sense kind of at the atomic level, and now we've got quantum physics and even going further and further down, right? And again, lean into it, learn, realize that life is actually about change. It's about change. It's about reinventing ourselves. It's about throwing out the old that no longer serves us and embracing the new that does. And so with that, as a reminder, go out and boogie. Boogie, boogie, boogie this week. And we will see you on the next episode. Have a great week.